This is 10 questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
WESN.
I just need to know what's going on with the PSA. How is it that two successive leaders in a row seemingly cannot have a tenure without some sort of controversy, particularly with regards to the facility of the elections for the union executive or union leadership? Currently, the only opposing slate's leader, Nixon Calendar, is complaining that the union is not going to have elections. The PSA's executive is going against the rules because it has reached the last day for the deadline of making a committee in order to be in compliance. Now, I'm not entirely sure about all the technicalities, about what is supposed to be done, when it's supposed to be done, how it's supposed to be done. Obviously, the current head of the PSA is saying, no, that's not true. Basically, he's saying PSA elections will continue as outlined by the Constitution. At the end of the day, the specifics matter a little bit less because this is not an isolated incident. There were similar things happening or being said or complaints made when the current THA member, one of the minority members of the THA, Watson Duke, was in charge of the PSA. And he was only removed not because of an election, despite the fact that, depending on how you interpreted the complaints or the protests or the what have you, you know, one wondered how popular was he with the PSA. Maybe he was. Maybe he was, and it was a vocal minority just trying to make mischief. But he was removed because of his further engagement as deputy political leader at the time of the THA. So he had to step down from the PSA's leadership. And his replacement now comes in, and again, we have to ask, is it a vocal minority, or is there serious issues going on? And even if it is a vocal minority, how is it that, particularly with this union, it seems as though there is enough room to maneuver some sort of, if it is all fake, right? If, this is for the sake of argument, that all of the complaints against the leadership of the PSA, whether it's Duke or Mr. Batiste, are wrong or false. What is it about the PSA that gives these opposition spokespeople the capacity to do this on a regular basis? That in and of itself, I think, is not necessarily the sign of a healthy organization, because it's not as though you're having internal differences that you resolve based on the culture, the rules, the regulations, and the leadership of the organization. It's being aired out in public, and it seems as though there's never really a resolution. In my recent memory, the one time the PSA didn't have some kind of bacchanal about the executive not allowing elections to take place or something similar along those lines was when it had to transition to Mr. Batiste. So I guess you could say there was a little bit of a honeymoon period. Other than that, and of course, we also have to ask, what if the leadership are the ones that have figured out something to exploit? Not the vocal minority, or maybe the dissenting voices are vocal majority, and the leadership has figured out how to manipulate the system. We don't know what the case is, or maybe it's something in the middle, something completely different. Either way, we're talking about an organization who's supposed to be a workers' advocacy group, basically, right? To put it in layman's terms, that's what a union does. It fights for the rights of its members who are employees of whatever institution. Its job is to ensure that its members are not exploited. And yet, to some extent, we have to ask, it seems as though the internal politics are allowing some to exploit the situation for what end, we don't exactly know. I just know that more and more it's difficult for me to take anything that comes out of the PSA officially. It's hard to take any of it seriously, unless you just basically consider it to be more politics as opposed to advocacy. The Nursing Association, the Communication Workers Union, now even the Teachers Union, I find all at some point have given us messaging to suggest, look, we are serious about the welfare of our members, and this is not just a money grab play, as it seems to be in the case of some other unions. And of course, there's politics involved and negotiation tactics, and you know, the spokespeople want to hold certain things close to their vest, and we get that. But with the PSA, it just, when this amount of dirty laundry, or rather, it's not that it was an excessive amount of dirty laundry, it's just a consistent amount over a long period of time. Could anyone tell me that this situation is healthy? And what's really happening to the average member of the PSA? Are their needs being met? I have no idea. But I struggle to see how that is possible, because usually what is going on now are bad signs, are indicators of chaos, and when such chaos reigns, usually it is not to the benefit of the people that are relying on such an entity to stand up for them, to work for them, to be there for them. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the work of the union day to day is going on without any real issue. But I don't know if that is true, how long that could last. To what end is there such chaos in the PSA? I have no idea. But I don't like it, because an entity such as this does have weight in the national conversation, beyond just the responsibility to its members, which alone is a significant duty of care. There is also the responsibility of any publicly recognized body, like a major workers' union, who may or may not have influence in our politics, to do so, to execute its duties, not necessarily to the detriment of its members, but for the benefit of the wider public, but still with some degree of responsibility. I mean, right now, that whole situation in Wassa, to what extent is it being affected, maybe positively, maybe negatively, by the PSA and what's happening in the PSA? We don't know. We don't know for sure. That's one of the key issues in TNT. Not if or where or when or how or why there is corruption, but just rather we know very little for sure. Hopefully, the situation in PSA could be cleared up. If I was a member there, I would want transparency. And I would like the situation to settle. But I'm not a member of that union, so it's up to the members to determine what it is they're willing to accept. It's almost as though, not just with regards to the everyday citizen and pie-in-the-sky politics, because I guess too many people think, oh, it's these big things, I don't have the ability, so I'm not going to bother about them. But when I say union, I would hope that to some extent you would speak out in any situation, because if that doesn't directly affect you, it's not some pie-in-the-sky politics. It's about your life. Sure, Michael Small here. This is Talking Point on WESN, the content capital. Just a couple of days more to the budget being read. This budget might be the most interesting budget of the entire administration's tenure. It might be the most interesting budget in the last 15 years, really. It is a budget that is a convergence of challenges, trials, as well as potentially criticisms and complaints. To what extent will the budget properly address our reality? And then to what extent will the discussion around the budget properly address the issues with the budget? That's the part that will more interest me perhaps than most other people. But with that said, quite a bit to get into before we welcome my co-host, so let's kick off today's Daily Review. Jumping straight in, the opposition leader has basically made the call for the Prime Minister to take over the National Security Ministerial portfolio. It's an interesting request. I don't really know what is the justification for it. And there's a part of me that wonders if this is just another political shot in the dark, right? Let's just say something and see if it gets traction. The reason why I say that is twofold. One, let's not forget the Prime Minister is the head of the National Security Council. So to some extent, he is involved. He's also the head of cabinet. So he is above the Minister of National Security. So again, to some extent, he is involved. And technically speaking, you should never really want your Prime Minister, particularly as the situation gets larger and larger, to have to also personally, directly have a ministerial portfolio. That's really not how the system is supposed to work. Because if he is trying to be the National Security Minister, then potentially his role as the Prime Minister will suffer. There is, of course, only 24 hours in a day, only 7 days in a week. That's why you have ministers for all these different portfolios, and you don't just lump a whole set of it under the office of the Prime Minister in the first place. Now, if you're in a smaller jurisdiction, like say Tobago, you may be able to get away with it. Except look what happened with the Chief Secretary. He divested the portfolio, or at least he was supposed to, of the Secretary of Finance. He was giving that up. The last THA budget was the last budget that he read, and I believe he got a replacement, or the replacement is tapped. I can't remember exactly if it's official. Of course, there have been prime ministers who have taken portfolios before, such as finance. I believe Mr. Manning took finance on at some point throughout the years. I can't remember exactly. Obviously, it would not have been the last time, his last term in office, because he had Minister of Finance. We have on the show. But the Prime Minister, he's supposed to oversee all of cabinet. That, to some degree, could be a full-time role. And then, therein lies my second point. I think a lot of what matters with regards to ministries, aka the budget, is being determined by some combination of cabinet as a whole and the Minister of Finance as the line minister. And the Prime Minister, of course, technically oversees both of those things, both together and individually, however you want to define it. So he has a say. To some extent, he has a say, right? I do believe a lot of the problems with the ministries are budgets. And the Prime Minister already has control over that situation from where he sits already. So I don't know how him being the line Minister of National Security is going to change budgetary deficiencies in the Ministry of National Security. I understand people want to blame Minister Hines, and his communication skills leave a lot for me to be desired. But when I think about the practical aspects of the job, for the most part, maybe you could complain about him not holding leadership of the various arms of national security to account. But outside of that, to some extent, we have to accept that his hands are tied because of that boogeyman of a word, budgets. Do we have the money necessary in order to reinstitute all of the things that are supposed to be operational? And then, of course, to what extent is cabinet and cabinet policy dictating the framework that all ministers have to operate within, but in this case, of course, the National Security Minister? We don't know. There have been times when I have looked at issues in education and health and other ministries, and I've pointed out the fact that, look, it's not as though the minister, I would imagine, and I think it is within the thought processes of others, would have the capacity to jump out on their own accord and just do what they want. In part because they have to do it within the framework of their allocation from the budget. Now, a lot of the issues with the TTPS, Coast Guard, those things probably can be solved by budget. Not enough tablets, not enough body cams with battery life that's too short. Technology has advanced. They had similar complaints in the United States years ago. So procurement issues, as well as just straight out resource issues. Those things can be dealt with by the Prime Minister where he is. So I get it. There was a situation that happened. It's alarming, right? The opposition leader is trying to do what all oppositions are supposed to do. The most recent one, of course, was there was a shootout near preschool. One of the victims of the attack, it seems to be a hit. At least one of the two men who died were targeted. One of the two men, they are reportedly cousins, tried to escape the attackers by going into a preschool. So to some extent, it's his fault that the preschool was involved to the total degree that it is. Basically, I mean, I don't know if he was able to exercise good judgment in the moment. Maybe he realized it was a preschool, maybe he didn't. Generally speaking, I'm not one to look kindly to a man trying to run from gunmen by going into a preschool where toddlers are. There's no real way to control the risk to make it fine. I get it, he may have been desperate, whatever. I believe at least one 4-year-old child was shot in the leg. Thank goodness he was shot in the leg. Hopefully there's no permanent damage with regards to that. But the situation overall was alarming. And I myself, I'm not surprised that it could happen. Yes, the victim should not have run into the preschool, but again, you still have to look at the shooters to say, you were shooting in the vicinity of a preschool. Why did you attack these two men there? Was it that they took it for granted that they would have been safe? This is the level that crime has reached. So I get it. The opposition is saying, we want change, we want drastic change. On a practical level, why would the Prime Minister, that simple change, mean anything different when at the end of the day, essentially we're going to get the same management philosophy and the same management structure. We're just going to change the nameplate. I don't know if this makes sense. Maybe it does, because then national security will get more attention by the main decision maker. But usually, if an organization has to do that, if the CEO has to personally intervene with running something on a day-to-day level, something specific that's supposed to have someone underneath him to say about it, that is a bad sign. Are we there yet? I'm not too sure. One could say, yes, we are there yet, that we need to take drastic actions. I just don't know if this is actually going to have practical benefit. Maybe the one thing I'll give it to the opposition leader, by telling the Prime Minister to do this, it's harder for him to kind of be divested from the situation or to be separate from it. He'll have to be within it day to day. He will have to deal with it on a day-to-day level, and maybe there is some benefit to that. But to some degree, the implication is that the Prime Minister has more skill and talent in order to execute these duties. Kind of is what I've been saying for some time. Who would we want as Prime Minister besides Dr. Keith Rowley? And if you don't like Dr. Keith Rowley as Prime Minister, I would say that's fine. Both things could be true at the same time. That just makes my question all the more alarming. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, my co-host should be here. This is talking about WSND content capital. Of course, like I said, budget's coming up, and budget is one of those things that is affecting everything. Crime is affecting everything. Yes, so is budget allocations. We will continue discussions when we return on all of the current events. Who knows? Maybe Mr. Shah might have something interesting to say this morning. Well, he always has something interesting to say, but some unique take that I have not necessarily given just yet. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com. I'm back here on talking about WESN, the content capital. Of course, it's almost though, Keaton, well, I'm starting discussion already, and I forgot to introduce the man, the myth, the legend, the man behind the screen, the other screen, not this screen. Of course, you know him as the host of AM Prime, and also every now and then he turns up on Talking Point, you know, for us to have a discussion. Mr. Keaton Shah, everybody.
Good morning, Sean Michael Small. Thank you very much. And there's no need for a formal introduction. I'm just glad to be back where it all began. So
I find it interesting. I don't know if you would agree with this, but it almost seems as though things have slowed down, except crime. The murder rate continues unabated, waits for no one. But things have slowed down. It's almost like everybody's like, okay, the budget's coming up, and let's just, certain things in the news notwithstanding, let's just, you know, we're waiting to see what's going to happen with this budget. We've already had one Tobago economist say Tobago needs more money. I think Twitter saying education needs more money. I don't know if anybody else is going to come out before the budget is right to say we need more money, but I just feel as though the country is kind of like holding its collective breath as they're waiting to see who gets what money.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if everyone is necessarily holding their collective breath, simply because a lot of people have reached a point where they are just awaiting the very basics. Are we getting more funding? Are we getting more allowances? What's happening with social expenditure? You know, are we going to see more taxes or a decrease in taxation? Hint, hint, I highly doubt, but you never know. And the thing is, Sean Michael Small, the reason why I say it is because of the level of frustration and stress associated generally with all that is happening in TNT. That being said, I am simply saying that is what a lot of people have expressed. I'm not encouraging that. I'm of the opinion that people need to listen very, very carefully to any budget presentation on the part of the Minister of Finance, because you can get lost in translation with his 4-hour preamble. But at the same time, it's very, very important to understand what the government is reporting to you. It's also very important to understand whether or not the government is inspiring that level of confidence in you as a potential investor. You know, honestly, it's also a very interesting budget in the sense that Colin Imbert has to balance where we are as an economy, but also has to balance the government's ambitions and goals as it relates to general elections being due within the next year. So, interesting times ahead.
Do you think this is going to be a make or break situation for the current administration? I started the show saying this might be the most interesting budget of the administration and maybe of the last 15 years, because with the partnership, it was a bit easier. They had significant revenue to play with. We didn't have, as a country, we didn't have all these questions about foreign exchange, about deficits, about basically financing part of the budget or with more loans or borrowing, right? I think I saw a social media post yesterday that one of the banks locally is going to further reduce US or foreign exchange spending limits on their credit card, right? Both the daily limits, I think if you are abroad and how much you could withdraw or spend per day, both the daily limit, I think it's for withdrawals or something like that, as well as the total amount per month or whatever period that you would be able to spend. They're reducing it, and there's the expectation that other banks will roll out similar. And generally, that's a sign, at least on the foreign exchange side, that the situation is continuing to decline. Would you say that there's a lot riding on this budget?
I don't think it's necessarily a make or break situation for the government, because similarly, you saw an election taking place in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then we could have made an argument that the budget presentation before that election may have been a make or break. I think every year we also seem to say that this is perhaps the most important budget in a historical context for Trinidad and Tobago, given the economic situation globally and those inflationary pressures, our continued reliance on oil and gas, and the mere fact that diversification has now become a fancy word that is used in conversations that go nowhere. So I don't necessarily think it is a make or break situation. As it pertains to foreign exchange, the situation has not gotten any better there at all. And I'm not entirely surprised that banks are going to further reduce the limit in respect to access to foreign exchange. The point being as well, Sean, that Trinidad and Tobago does have foreign exchange. It's just that we perhaps don't necessarily prioritize it. At the same time, one might argue Trinidad and Tobago does not have money, but there are some Trinbagonians that have money. Trinidad and Tobago does not have foreign exchange. There's some Trinbagonians that have access to foreign exchange because of business interests abroad. It's a situation that is very, very difficult to not necessarily understand, but a situation that's very difficult to work out, because generally speaking, we have not prioritized our expenditure. We have not prioritized in the best interest of Trinidad and Tobago development expenditure as well. And that is a key area of which I am focusing on, because I need to know where the government is investing money and seeing where we can get the best returns. And thus far, all I've heard in the last budget and within the last year is we're focusing more and more on dragging gas, we're focusing more so on the manatee fields. I personally think that, we kind of need to see around that fluff right now. That is long-term thinking. What's going to happen in the short term? Are we all going to come to a point where we're eating bread and butter every single day? And perhaps many people have to do that because it's so difficult until we get to a point where we have these injections into our economy again. This is why I'm saying it's very, very important people pay attention to what the Minister of Finance is presenting on Monday.
Well, therein lies an interesting point, because I never really thought of this before until you said specifically, well, no, dragon gas and all of those, that's long term. And you're right, that's 4 years into the future. So depending on how you want to frame it, with regards to our immediate needs, that might be considered more of a medium to long term situation. We're not going to see that in the short term, any sort of returns. We're not going to see that alleviate the problems. So ironically, the oil and gas, usually, what's said about diversification? Well, in the short run, we still need to rely on oil and gas, but in the long run, we need to look at diversification. Dare I ask, has the script ironically flipped on us? And in the long run, we might get some relief down the line with oil and gas and energy sector. But right now, if we want any short-term relief, we might actually need to try to look at diversification just to see what we could scrape together?
I think the government, to a certain extent, is also hoping that the private sector props up our economy. I think that is what they have been banking on. You understand that non-energy manufacturing has grown considerably. In fact, one might argue that it's actually more of a prop to our economy right now than oil and gas. And you know, but we have to think about export capital as well. That's something that is very, very important to bear in mind. But in relation to non-energy manufacturing and the private sector, that in itself is possibly where diversification comes into play, without the government having to invest too much. Central Bank a couple of weeks ago released a report indicating that our energy sector is down by 10%. After the third quarter, TNT found itself in a deficit of over $4 billion. You know, in the meantime, non-energy manufacturing has grown considerably. So if we're speaking about diversification no longer necessarily focuses on just agriculture. I think when people think about diversification, people think solely of agriculture. There are other avenues as well, and you know, manufacturing across TNT, especially from the standpoint of the private sector, has played its part. The question now is whether or not it is getting the sustained support that is necessary for that continued growth. You don't want it to grow to a point and then it plateaus. You want continued growth. Are we seeing that happening? Are we going to see that happening? Again, all these things hopefully could be answered when the Minister of Finance puts forward his budget presentation on Monday. There's something else that you also have to consider, and that is in respect to our workforce. I'm wondering whether or not the Minister of Finance is also going to address the issue in respect to our aging working population and what is happening in respect to our NIS. Because, Sean, I mean, I'm sure you follow in international news. China, which has had some of the lowest retirement ages globally, recently had to increase their retirement age because of an aging population and a national insurance service that is essentially collapsing. It's running out of money. Trinidad and Tobago finds itself in that position as well, not only because of an aging population, but you have less and less people entering the workforce. Question marks surrounding why you have less and less young people entering the workforce, whether it is because of the availability of jobs or because of the current situation in Trinidad, where young people find themselves wanting to move abroad for opportunities as compared to staying in TNT. Even recently, there was another debate surrounding scholarship winners not coming back to Trinidad and Tobago, though they have an obligation, a contractual obligation to the government. They're not coming back because they can't get jobs. So those are things that you have to bear in mind as well. And again, is that going to be addressed in the budget? We will see.
I think Korea also has an issue with young people giving up just trying to find jobs. It's kind of crazy because I think conservative ideology is, well, as long as you get a job, you're going to get yourself out of poverty. And the economical reality, I think, of certain, maybe urban settings, I don't know if it's the same thing for rural, but rural has less opportunities, is that it might not be so simple anymore. It may have been simple in the past, might not be that simple now. But with regards, and speaking about...
Korea has a situation, you know, use Korea as an example. Korea has a situation where their child birth rates are declining in Korea. You know, and that is affecting their workforce and their population as well. So, you know, people are probably thinking whether or not younger people are focusing more so on their careers, or possibly, and it sounds very selfish, but it's very difficult to raise a child now, whether or not we can afford to actually have children.
Now, speaking about jobs, a lot of that is going to come with the private sector. One would hope, right? I mean, in Tobago, it is assumed, the consensus really, amongst even Tobagonians, is that the largest employer by a significant margin. We're talking 60 to 80% of Tobagonians are employed by the THA, depending on who you speak to. In Trinidad, I'm not necessarily thinking, and I could be very wrong, I don't necessarily think numbers that high, but even a lower figure is kind of high. The private sector, look into the private sector. Keith, and I have to ask, because I mentioned foreign exchange concerns. Do we really have a private sector beyond importation? Because it seems to me just about everything, with very, very, very few exceptions, everything in the private sector is dependent on imports to some degree or another. We have literally no real production base that we could say, if things dry up tomorrow, if the ships stop coming in, we have an industrial base to produce things from scratch that we could hang our hat on, that we could then utilize as a springboard for something else, or that we could have as the core of our private sector. So when all else fails, we know we produce X. What do we produce? Because agriculture ain't getting probably what it needs, right? And I'm just not seeing, I mean, I've complained about this before. We have a food security issue, but the private sector does not invest in industries that will deal with food security. So where's the disconnect? And I feel as though the private sector is so risk averse. They don't want to think outside the box or do anything that is not proven. And right now what's proven is we'll use up the foreign exchange in order to import stuff to sell to you. And at that point, I might as well just shop online. Why am I going to bother with local businesses for?
Well, the Minister of Finance, to a certain extent, last year in his budget did speak on this issue. I don't think he necessarily addressed it, and I don't think it has been addressed, and that is to deal with consumerism. It's not just a matter of private sector looking at risk, but it's also the taste that Trinbagonians have. There is opportunity that exists where you don't even necessarily need high production levels. For example, we've been gifted in many ways in terms of our natural environment. Chagaramas, to me, should have been and still could be an economic hub. We saw recently with Hurricane Beryl how many boats and how many yachts actually came to Trinidad to form part, well, really seeking shelter away from the storm and the severity of that storm. But throughout the course of the year, Chagaramas needs to be an economic hub where you actually are earning you're earning foreign exchange as well. You know, and that, what is that going to take in terms of investment? And again, it's not necessarily going to cost a lot in production because the resources are already there, they exist. But it's whether or not we actually put our mindsets and utilize that particular geographical area to our benefit. Also, to me, something that we've lost out on is in terms of our capacity for ships to actually dock in Trinidad. I'm talking about cargo, because they prefer of the islands. If I'm not mistaken, is it St. Kitts or St. Lucia that is now preference to Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to cargo ships, right? But that is also an area which we have lost out on as well. The potential exists. We have ignored that potential. If you're now taking a look at production, we spoke, I said earlier on, agriculture does not necessarily mean everything. But Sean, how often have you heard the term agro-processing and packaging? Mm-hmm. There was a conversation between Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana where Guyana was producing enough food to feed itself as well as also contribute to the markets within CARICOM. Trinidad and Tobago was supposed to be that hub to process and package such food. What's happened there? Where has that conversation gone to? Now, I know we were having issues in respect to Guyana and honey, and also at one point in time, Guyana in respect to business people going to Guyana to try and get foreign exchange because they simply can't get it in Trinidad. Whether or not that has actually taken over the conversation and we've forgotten about agro-processing completely, that's something else. But then I also recall the Prime Minister years ago speaking about the potential for Trinidad and Tobago and our lumber industry. We have potential there as well. And yet, where has that gone to? We're still importing a lot of lumber, particularly from Guyana. So, you know, all these things, all these little factors, something you have to bear in mind as well. Look at Piarco International Airport, which also could have been used as an economic hub, right? A lot of planes land here because of how cheap the fuel is. That's simply the reason why they land here. But it's not a preferred hub in terms of planes parking, landing, maintenance. It's not a hub for landing, parking, and I have to stress on that point. It could have been, and it still could be, because the potential exists. But is there a willingness to invest in such? So, you asked me a question in respect to whether or not a private sector exists. They do exist. They are heavily reliant on foreign exchange, but there are opportunities as well for export capital, of which we have not developed on as yet. And I do not necessarily see that happening anytime soon, though it should have happened yesterday.
I just find, not to get too sidetracked, but I find it interesting whenever anybody brings up Guyana. I'm just looking at the movie town situation, and I'm like, I'm wondering if one, Guyana itself is going to look at us funny because of how we're treating one of their nationals, and two, a foreign businessman has a major investment in Trinidad, and apparently, you know, something's going on there. Something's going on there. I've heard rumors that it's even more than potentially just what initially we have speculated. Either way, it doesn't look good. And when we get the reports about, oh, the opposition scared away Jinder Navil, I'm like, oh, so I guess, you know, Derek Chin and how he's being treated is not potentially, because we're not getting a good explanation about what's going on, right? Most of the information is coming from Mr. Chin. You might say, well, obviously he's biased for himself, but it's not like the other side is giving us any good information about what's going on. So it's hard to give an objective read of the situation without just going what Mr. Chin says, and what Mr. Chin says, his version of events, cause a lot of questions to be asked. Is this how we're going to treat? Because to some extent, all right, yes, it's not a producing entity, but it's still a significant, one of the few pieces of private sector development in the country has been movie town. And if that sounds ridiculous to you, therein lies the problem. If a multiplex cinema is one of the largest, healthiest, most complicated private sector investments that we've had in the however many years, if that's the best we've got, I don't know what does that say about the pace of our economy, the direction of our economy. Would you agree with that? Not to put down movie town, just that one would hope we would have more than just that for over the last 10 years or 20 years.
So the thing is, it begs the question, what are we doing to attract new investors to Trinidad and Tobago? What are we doing to attract foreign direct investment beyond just our energy sector? And you have to bear in mind that BHP Billington pulled out, if not all, the majority of their investments in Trinidad and Tobago, and they have moved to Guyana. Right, and that's energy sector right there. But what are we doing to get other investors in TNT? One of the things I've noticed recently is that there's been a lot of commercial developments where you're seeing a lot of shopping complex popping up everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Development, to a certain degree, the construction sector, especially from a private sector point of view, is still seeing some sort of benefits. Right? I don't know what's happening in respect to public sector and works with contractors there, because I'm aware that contractors are owed millions. I don't know if it's gone into the billions as yet, but I know they're owed millions and millions of dollars. But I am seeing a lot of retail sectors popping up. The question is that the only avenue now for investment where people are going to start investing more and more in property, hoping that we get it rented out? But even then, Sean Michael Small, there is an issue there in itself. Many of the stores that are renting out these commercial complexes now are what? They are franchises.
Yep.
Right? Many of them. I'm not saying all, I'm saying many of them. And they still rely heavily on foreign exchange. So at the end of the day, for each franchise that you open, you have to pay rent for the name, rent for the stock. You have to pay for, you have to purchase the stock outright. You have to rent in terms of all the intellectual property and copyright, everything associated with it. That costs a lot of money. And that's why I keep saying, as much as you might see these institutions popping up or these commercial complexes propping up, what are they costing us in terms of how much is going out of TNT?
More and more, I'm wondering, because we went from PEE to PEG seemingly in short order. I think in maybe less than a year or a year now. But I mean, we've been in PEG licenses for cars for a while. And I am stunned by the amount of new mini SUVs, new Mercedes and BMWs that I see just within that range. And I am wondering, because I brought this up before, is it that it seems as though the rich are fine, they've gotten their new cars. You know, to some extent the upper middle class is fine, they've gotten their new cars, right? We had a lot of these new hybrid mini SUVs basically just get dumped on the road within the last year, right? It makes one think the economy really has a lot of money, right? Although, fortunately, inflation is not high right now, so that would indicate, well, no, maybe there's not that much liquidity moving around. But I do wonder if there's an insulation by the upper socioeconomic brackets that potentially might blind a lot of politicians to the reality. Because yes, there have always been people who are poor. So seeing someone being poor, that's not an indicator of anything. But I don't know if the politicians understand what is the actual economic reality for the majority of the country. Because even the middle class, I feel, is getting squeezed out more and more, is pinching pennies. I myself, to some extent, am pinching pennies.
Sure, we are all pinching pennies. It's not just you, it's every single individual now is counting their pennies. You know, and you ask the question whether or not the government actually has an idea of the reality that we are facing as citizens. I don't necessarily think so, because recently a government minister was quoted as saying this is where crime has reached following an incident of which he experienced. That in itself suggests that they were completely out of touch with the reality of the crime situation. They may be completely out of touch with the financial situation as well, because at the end of the day, they are guaranteed to receive their salaries. And they're also guaranteed in respect to allowances that they received. And all in all, it comes with the position. But to a certain extent, once they are elected and appointed, there seems to be like a level of blindness, or like there is an opaque lens between them and the reality that citizens are facing. So your point of cars, people are always going to purchase vehicles. It can be seen as a necessity because public transportation is not necessarily the most reliable, and need I say it's becoming very, very unsafe. You know, generally traveling now is becoming unsafe. Many people have reached a point where they simply don't have a choice. But at the end of the day, if people are earning enough, if a household is earning enough income, they are going to purchase a vehicle because it's seen as a necessity. However, Sean Michael Small, you're speaking about a lot of luxury vehicles on the roadways, and that's because, or put it this way, the middle class is disappearing if it has not already disappeared. And so you're going to see the wealthier purchasing more vehicles. But you're also going to see a lot of people now focusing on roll-on, roll-off, as we call it in TNT. They are going to be focusing a lot on that. And I know that at one point the government really was trying to squeeze that industry. They were really trying to flex their muscles when it came to that particular industry, because a lot of people were actually favoring purchasing those vehicles, foreign use vehicles, as compared to vehicles directly from the dealer. It costs less, and also when it comes to warranty and parts and all that, it costs less in the long term. But apart from that, Sean Michael Small, we also need to be practical. Driving a car in Trinidad and Tobago, it's the easiest way. I'm speaking about the type of vehicle. SUVs and pickups are going to become preferred choices because driving cars in particular is one of the easiest ways to lose money because our road conditions are, well, you face it every day. You know what I'm speaking about.
Yeah. I think just in a well, just going home, all of a sudden I realized, oh, there's this huge pothole. And when I say huge, it is almost as wide as my car. So, and it's a single lane road. If there's oncoming traffic, I just have to slow down and go into it. And it's not shallow. It's pretty deep. I have no idea if there's any jagged edges. I just hope that I don't blow a tire again, because that has happened on that road with a deep pothole already.
The good news for you, though, is that it's an election year. So there's the possibility that though that existed for the last few years, because we're heading into silly season, or we are already in silly season, you might be fortunate enough to see that pothole being patched. And I say patched because it'll be patched, and in a couple weeks' time, it might just all wash away with one heavy shower. Or, you know, it happens.
Let me finish up with a hypothetical, theoretical question here. Of course, you know, the Great Depression, they had FDR's New Deal, they had a lot of big infrastructure projects. They had an issue with employment at the time too. So it was a 2-for-1 shot, because they made things like, I believe, the Hoover Dam and other projects which benefits the local and national infrastructure to this day of the United States. Now, one of the things I find interesting is, why don't we have similar projects, particularly to try to have productive employment, as opposed to, well, we pay you money and you don't actually show up to work. And, you know, with regards to, I don't know how many offices of government and state entities that applies to, right? Because I say that because I don't know if we have the money for it anymore, but infrastructure work might actually have a lot of indirect benefits with regards to productivity, which could then help the economy in various ways. One of the things you pointed out to Shagaramas, I had Harvey Boris on the show. He pointed out that cable cars might be a way to get people into the area, because without needing them to have to be on a vehicle, because I don't think there's any practical way to increase the roads through and to the heart of the tourist area of Shagaramas and to the yacht clubs and what have you. If there were cable cars, it might be a cheaper way to expand the transportation infrastructure in that specific scenario. But that still takes money. And right now, I just have to ask, should we be looking and hoping for those kind of budgetary expenditures, or is it that Ministry of Education allocation, National Security allocation, health allocation, etc., we should just try to hold straight? Because I don't know if we have the money to spend for all of the development projects that we actually need, much less want.
Well, you're not going to get all the money to focus on the development projects that Toronto needs right now. But that's the thing, you can still focus on some development projects. You see, this is the thing, Sean Michael Small, we don't need vanity projects. We don't need that right now, and quite frankly, we can't afford it. But too often, that is where the money is allocated to. Now, the one thing that I can say in respect to the government that they've done well, or they've embarked upon doing well, is actually trying to reduce government rental in terms of offices by building permanent homes or permanent structures for the various ministries. I think that is something that is good in principle. But again, it's something that needs to continue, something that needs to be focused on, because we are losing a lot of money in terms of rental for some offices that don't even necessarily have the level of productivity that is required. So in that particular budget, John Michael Small, in that sense, when it comes to the budget, we need to focus on development. We need to focus on investment. You're not going to get it all now, but you need to start. Vanity projects are not going to benefit me. Maybe a splash of paint or a coat of paint is going to help a building, but that's what paint company, and by the way, paint companies in Trinidad and Tobago, majority of them are owned by one umbrella company. They're the ones that are going to benefit, you know, for a splash of paint. But I would prefer to see long-term development expenditure. To your example of Shagaramas, that is just Shagaramas is an example of potential plus unequal development. And that's how I like to phrase it. So much potential associated with Shagaramas, but there's been unequal development. The area has become so developed in terms of infrastructure, and there's still so much that can be done and should be done, but you don't look at the environment in respect to how am I getting to Chaguaramas? How am I holding the capacity of which I am building for? And how am I actually going to continue developing the area, particularly with the natural resources that I have at hand? How am I going to find that? How am I going to find that perfect match? We have not done that. Instead, we created the Chaguaramas Development Authority, which, I say, it's just government creating another form of employment for people without it serving any real purpose. How much money is pumped into the Chaguaramas Development Authority? How much do we get out of the Chaguaramas Development Authority? Those are simple little things that need to be examined microscopically, but unfortunately, again, we created employment there. That's just about it. Let's leave it.
The thing is, you're right, potential both for tourism but as well as for local entertainment. And I think the attempts to invest into the area kind of betrays the fact that everyone could see it. We just don't really know how to achieve it. With that said, go ahead, Keaton.
I was just going to say there's one other thing that we didn't focus on, which was social development and social expenditure. And I'm waiting to say, I don't think the government is going to touch that, and I don't think from a political standpoint they can afford to touch that. Go on.
Well, I wanted to actually have the last question to be, what do you think the population will want more of? Because my fear is that, as you rightfully pointed out, the majority of the population will want social expenditure over long-term development, and we'll just continue the vicious cycle of always sacrificing the long-term for the short-term, so we never really progress. Do you expect anything different from the responses of the budget? Because usually we have oh, this budget was nice, I got this. And then when you think about it, it's like, that's nice. They're giving you a fish. They're not teaching you how to fish. You're still dependent on them. Good luck.
That's the thing, exactly. Giving a man a fish, but you're not teaching him how to fish. And that's the point I was trying to make. Exactly what are we doing, or what has the government done to wean the population off of that reliance on social expenditure? But that's the thing. The easiest thing to do is to continue to pump money into social development and social expenditure rather than actually trying to look at development expenditure or investment. It's just easier to do that. And I think that is the approach of which the government has done. You need to create a culture of entrepreneurship in TNT. You need to figure out exactly why it is we have younger people not entering the workforce. Exactly what are the reasons behind that. And you need to also try and look at areas that will allow for development, that will allow for investment. And I'm not talking about just financially, but human capital as well. In that sense, we can start weaning people off of social expenditure. But at this particular point, because of the state of our economy and the state of our affairs, and because we have not done anything to necessarily boost TNT in the last, arguably the last 9 years, I would say, even going back to the People's Partnership Government, you saw a lot of development taking place, but there was still that reliance on the oil and gas industry. This is not just a one government approach. This has been successive governments, but that's the whole point. Government has not done anything different. They've campaigned on being different, but they have not necessarily done anything different. That's why we find ourselves in this position where we are right now. So even though the IMF gave favorable outlook for growth in Trinidad and Tobago in July, this is right before the Minister of Finance was due to present his mid-year budget review. The IMF gave a favorable outlook for growth in respect to Trinidad and Tobago. Have we seen that? Have we experienced that? Are we actually seeing that happening, or is that the IMF basing it on, hold on, outlook for growth? Okay, we're going to see growth happening potentially in 4 to 5 years' time with Dragon Gas and Maritime. I need to know what's happening now. I need to know what's happening next year, and I need to know whether or not it's worth staying in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm sorry to say like that, but that's exactly what a lot of young people are thinking.
Yeah. That's basically it. I myself, like I said before, I think it was last year, the end of last year, I was thinking maybe we can't really deal with this, you know, not unless more people want to try for change. And the thing is, I think the private sector and the public sector as a jobs creation situation is disappointing, and I'm kind of seeing them descend into holding patterns of what they think is safe, and they're not necessarily actually trying to innovate anything. That's more or less where we're at. So why do we expect it to get better? I don't know. The response to this budget will be just as interesting as the budget itself. Let's just put it that way. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll open up the phone lines so you, the viewer, could weigh in and have your say on this or any other matter. Stay tuned. This is Talking About a WSN show. Michael Small, Keith Shah. We'll be right back after this. And we're back here on Talking Point. Now is the time we open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you, the viewer, where you could have your say. Please, when you're on air, we've taken the call, have the conversation through the phone. Don't try to have the conversation through the TV. There's a delay. So listen to the phone. Don't listen to what's going on television. We have our first caller from Digger Martin. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Small and Mr. Shah.
Morning.
Morning.
You were talking about the budget, and I'm hoping that the Prime Minister addresses crime in the budget, seeing that he has been front, center, and behind on crime from the position of national security head of that community. And I want to put it in perspective why. I see we have plenty boots on the ground now. Boots on the ground will not solve the problem because they shut down the intelligence agency. We need more brains than bronze, and that is what he's feeling. Remember, a year and a half ago, he commanded the whole of the TTPS leadership to come and meet with him to have a breakfast, dinner, and lunch at Napa. Only remember that? And let's see why he's chairing that meeting. They had a shootout in Roseville in front of a school. I have heard nothing of how he, as national security head, what came out of that particular investigation. Those same set of police who was there, recently a lot of them got promoted to ACP and all kind of things. So you're recycling the same set of people who lack and are putting intelligence in a question mark to move us away from crime. We have become like America, mass shooting outside the school, and it looked like it happened inside the school now. You remember in America, everything is inside the school, they shoot up, We have it outside and we have it inside. What that tells you, we does not see the red flag when it's up in the air. The red flag that was up in the air with that Napa consultation, nada came out of it. That really, what I am disappointed with, you see those national awards, I thought it was on. They didn't give me no SC, and they didn't give me no national. The longest serving MP who has done nothing in are going to have a nice morning.
All right, caller.
Would you call her? Have a nice morning.
I mean, I guess he brings up the age-old question: how confident are we that promotions in the public sector, and in this case, in national security, specifically the police, but it could apply to others, are done because of merit? The funny part about it is, from what I understand, there are a lot of police officers in the lower ranks, apparently, who actually do get results and do provide meritorious service, but for whatever reason, once they get to the ACP, DCP level, it's almost like if they lose their powers, the higher up the ranks they go, Keaton, and we just don't see it. It's either that or their skill set just is not, it's not appropriate. It just does not work at a higher level for whatever reason. And I don't really have any example that comes to mind where that is pertinent to say that it makes sense, that will actually be the way that it works. That literally you could just be promoted 1 to 2 steps, and all of a sudden your skills, your expertise, your experience does not prepare you at all for the job. Because I don't know. I don't know how we're picking the people that we're picking, but the results speak for themselves. We have San Fernando on the line, so I'll have to ask you to respond after. Mr. San Fernando, good morning. You on the air?
Morning, Sean. Morning, Keaton.
Good morning.
Let me first. I'd like to say we have to be guardians of the truth. So let me just answer one thing quickly. Of your caller from Diego Martin. The Prime Minister never shut down the intelligence agencies. He never did.
Yeah.
And I have a little problem when you all let them slip and get away with these little things that they're trying to interject into the conversation. Let me move on from that.
Okay.
Talking about the economy and the budget, right? I think, let me set the tone. If you listen to the Chief Justice earlier this week, no, that was Friday gone.
With the opening of the lawsuit.
He just said he got 80%, I think it was 80%, if I'm not mistaken, of his allocation. He said he was allocated 1.7% of the national budget, and he got 80% of that, and he spent 90 or 95% of it already. And that is the position that sets the tone for what's going to happen. There is not enough money to go around. So if you would look at when the estimate of expenditure come out for last year, you will see all those ministries, the allocation that they were given in the budget, they have not received it because there is no money in the system. The system is crumbling. Keaton mentioned something about Guyana, and let me say this, Keaton, that food security issue with Guyana. Guyana have by and large had food security because of their many years of oppression by fellows like Forbes, Burnham, and they had to adapt to what they to deal with what they had. So they started to plant and eat local. We are way far away from that. Well, that ain't happening here. We have some growing pains to go through. You see the banks planning to reduce, and they're going to reduce again the allocation on your credit cards for foreign exchange. That is because we are getting less and less foreign exchange. Chagaramas, Keaton, you mentioned that. Chagaramas, that industry, that ship repair and stuff, that has largely been decimated by the state. Let me see. You talked about the boats coming, the ships now going to higher up, St. Lucia or St. Kitts, you said, to do the discharge. When Trinidad and Tobago, Port of Spain basically and Point were the hubs. So when they're coming from Miami and from Houston, let me tell you why. We no longer have a refinery.
Yeah.
One of the attractions that they came here was because the fuel was much cheaper than elsewhere. Our international fuel costs were much cheaper. We were competing with ports in the U.S. Now that we have to import, we no longer have that competitive edge. So as a ship owner, it's not beneficial for me to use Trinidad and Tobago as a hub. This is just one of my on the way ports now. I find another hub because St. Lucia and like people like St. Lucia, there's a large what you call it, oil storage. There's a large oil storage capacity there. So a lot of people move now. Big companies bring the fuels and store in St. Lucia, and then it's closer to station terminals where they could easily get product down the line. So there's a lot of things in that is against the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, notwithstanding our jet to GDP ratio and we have to pay back our external debt. So the budget, what they're going to try to do is contain and maintain because of an election that's coming next year. That is all that's going to happen. So don't expect any goodies. Don't expect any fanfare. People of Trinidad and Tobago need to start to pull up their socks and adjust to what is going to be happening. As you all said, the brain drain is on.
Yeah.
It is alive and well and going at full speed. Just now I mightn't see you all on the TV. I would fully understand that, you know. I would fully understand that the young people, and in addition to the brain drain, they are not making children anymore.
Yeah.
Or as they used to.
Yeah.
You know how many younger friends I have. I call them friends. Friends I have, and friends' children. That the family, there's no grandchildren. And the people are getting older, and we're not seeing grandchildren coming. And we have to understand that because it is frightening. That I know youths have master's degrees and they're home. They're not getting anything to do. So what they're looking to do? Leave the country.
Yeah.
So guys, that is the state of that. That is my take on what's to come in the budget and further on. Have a good day.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Caller, for your points.
I had a family member who I think she had, I can't remember if she had a scholarship or who gave her the scholarship or whatever, but she did really well in her exams, went to, I believe, an Ivy League school abroad, and the long and short is, if she had to do government service, she did it, and after that, or if she didn't have to do government service after school, she couldn't even get a job in a field. And eventually, to get a good job, she had to go away. She had to go away to get a good job in her field, what she studied. And I think when you say people with masters, one of the things I have to admit, sometimes those of us in Trinidad and Tobago, you want to study things that may not really have an industry locally to support us. And if you've reached the master level in a career path that isn't really in existence here, that unfortunately is just automatic. And we have to live with that already. There's a group of our young people who automatically need to go abroad to find a job, much less those that supposedly should be able to work in a field here and can't find a job, which unfortunately is probably more regular than we think. We have Shagonas on the line. Good morning, caller.
Morning, Sean.
Good morning.
I hear a lot about the budget, but people don't appear to realize what the budget is about. The budget is about sharing out goodies or giving out money. The budget is about reviewing the economy, government. Each government agency is supposed to review their position and make recommendations on how they could improve themselves. And then that has to be, you have to estimate your revenue that you will collect, and also the expenditure of what this will cost. And this will go to an agency in the Ministry of Finance, who checks it out to make sure they have the relevant authority for all these things. And when that is approved, then they go to that, the Minister of Finance will use all these from the entire government service, including companies, government owned and all these things, and then look to match revenue with expenditure. Because usually you have more call for money than you have revenue coming. And that is how it is supposed to be done. Second point I would like to make, you see this thing about listening to the agencies. We had this thing yesterday with Karen. I asked her a simple question, and she danced all over the place and never answered the question. I said government did a research on local government reform. They put people to discuss it. They could read the report all about, and you could see how they make the recommendation that you should give the land and building taxes to the government. In the end, they do the opposite. And I asked them the question time and time, where is the logic for this? You could see, and she tells you talk everything in the whole except answer that question. And that is the problem. Right? That is why property. I know what they did. What them done for them did, they went to get some Americans to advise them on property tax. Which was the stupidest thing you could do. Because America have a totally different system. They have a capital value system for financing, which is, I explained this to you some time ago, which is not suitable for our system. Our system is by far superior if you follow it. Any questions, gentlemen?
No.
I don't have a question, Professor, but I can't speak on Karen's behalf, but perhaps Karen cannot answer the question. Maybe she just simply can't, or she just really doesn't do.
So I would say this. We wanted to know if the professor was speaking about basically when, at least in my mind, back in 2010 or now. Because if it's now, the question would have a different context. If it's back then, I believe you are correct.
It's the same thing. All I want to know, when they make that decision, where is the technical research on it? That's all I think. You have to do it now or then.
No, it does, Professor, it does have to do it now, because with regards to the current legislation, that's the property tax that's being implemented, we can't necessarily speak in detail with regards to the government sources for the now. If it was back then, well, that would be different.
I talk about way back then.
Okay.
Because when they draft the law to change the Municipal Corporation Act, right? What that had in it was to give the regional authorities the land and building taxes. When it finally reached the House, they changed it up. And all I want to know is where is the research for that changing? If you do research and you get something, but I was in the public service, and you go to all the authorities and they make a decision, to change that, you have to give you a reason. Right? That's what I say.
Okay, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I think, thank Karen for coming on every Wednesday and for contributing to the conversation. And I think she plays a very important role, and she's a staple on Talking Point. But I just find it sometimes very intriguing. Like, I don't know if you're following it, that Hope, of which Karen is a deputy political leader, the party's position on property tax versus Karen's position on property tax is two different. It's two different things. So, and again, not making excuses. I can't speak on behalf of Karen. Maybe she just can't answer the question, or she does not want to.
I will say this. The opinions that Karen expresses on Talking Point are Karen's opinions as a contributor on Talking Point. She has quite admirably, in my opinion, because I didn't ask her to do this. She was very insistent on this. She is not looking to necessarily use her role and essentially her job on Talking Point as a campaign platform, right? As a backdoor way to do political campaigning, right? If there's a pertinent question with regards to Hope, we could bring it up, but she generally tends to stick to the technical aspects of the matter. To be fair to Karen, yesterday, maybe the professor's criticisms very much hold throughout the months and years, but yesterday, when asked directly if he was referring to recently, he did say yes, which made us think that he was speaking about the current situation where the property tax is being put into the consolidated fund, which she did explain. With regards to what he is getting at, yes, to some extent, we have not necessarily gotten her on the record to speak directly with specifically what he's saying. But for some reason, she's not here, he says it to me a bit clearer for me to understand than when she is here. So I don't know exactly why there's a disconnect there. But with that said, go ahead,
even if
Ethan.
Karen chose not to use Talking Point as a platform to campaign on the party group, even if she chose to, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, Sean Michael Small, we should not and we will not allow any political party, whether it be Hope, whether it be PNM, UNC, we will not use it as a platform, and we will never allow it to be used as a platform for campaigning. Everyone is welcome to the program. Everyone is welcome to share their comments or their thoughts. But at the end of it all, this is not a platform for anyone to come and campaign on for whatever interest that they have.
Of course, and I'd like to add to that. There's something that I got from Stephen A. Smith. Right now, he's one of the biggest sports journalists or media personalities in sports in the United States and potentially around the world, one of the biggest. And he pointed out to the fact that, look, and it's true, on Talking Point, even if we don't expressly say it, the door is always open. If you have an important story to give, you're a minister, you're an MP, you're a member of the opposition, you're a member of a third party, you're a member of an advocacy group, union, whatever, you could come on our morning programs, both AM Prime and Talking Point. The door is open to you, so you could get your story out there. But make no mistake, it's actually easier sometimes, at least for me, if you are not willing to talk. Because then I don't have to necessarily take your perspective into account because you're not willing to give it to me. So I will be just like the rest of the population, and when Keaton said he will be just like the rest of the population, we'll be left on devices. Don't complain if all we could do is speculate without your input, because the door is open officially, and maybe I'll keep that clarion call going. Even if we don't call you to invite you because we're under the assumption that you're not willing to talk about it. If you're willing to talk about it, you will get your fair shake here. We will give you the room to say your piece. Just don't come with no mama guy nonsense, right? That is unreasonable. We'll have to push back on that. And with that, well, Keaton, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I'm just simply saying it doesn't even have to be a minister or a politician. It doesn't have to be that. If you are a citizen of TNT and you feel you'd like to contribute to the conversation, last week we had Mr. Paul on, and he contributed to a conversation, right? And need I say, it was a very good conversation. So again, if you are a citizen of TNT who would like to give constructive conversation to Talking Point, it ends up being a debate at the end of the day.
And I just
but in respect to just to address your point about ministers, Sean Michael Small, they have our email, we get press releases, we get requests for interviews for certain segments or for certain interviews. We don't always have to reach out to them. It's here, it's available. We welcome conversation, but we in campaign and fear. Sorry.
Leave the rhetoric at home. You have something important to say, that's fine. You have the technical aspects of the matter, that's fine. Right? Leave the campaign and the bubble at home. We try. Sometimes we inject a little bubble as tongue-in-cheek, but for the most part, when we're serious, it's about the actual meat of the matter. And with that said, I would like to acknowledge what Mr. San Fernando said. I think, I can't speak for Keaton, I'll just speak for myself. I made the mistake, you're right, you pointed it out, we let it pass. I just, in my mind, I think it was just hyperbole and I let it pass. But you're right, to some degree, we can't just assume that everybody will interpret it as hyperbole and treat it for what I think it is, right? Because on a technical level, yes, when somebody says things like that, oh, the SSA was shut down. Well, to some extent, we have to guard against that because we do not have anything concrete to seriously say the SSA was shut down. I don't think he meant it in quite that way, but that actually does not matter. The results of what you are concerned about, Mr. San Fernando, can still happen. So that was a clarification that we should have made.
Well, I mean, in respect to me, I'm glad that they have people who are paying attention and are willing to call in and contribute and make those corrections. I'm glad. And yes, we do have a responsibility as well. But thank you very much, Mr. Sanfano, for pointing out that. And in that regard, I like healthy conversation. I like healthy debate.
Yeah, and Mr. Digger-Martin, I don't assume that you intentionally said it and meant it in the worst possible way. It's just, like I said, not everybody might pick up on that and might assume that you're speaking literally. Or maybe you did mean it, but then you would need to provide receipts as to why you believe that to be the case. With that said, I want to thank all the callers for calling in and joining the conversation. Interesting areas that we've touched on just in this call-in segment alone. Keaton, once again, great to talk to you.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me here, and I look forward to the next conversation, which I think is next week, Tuesday, right after the... Yeah. Prepare yourself for that, Sean Michael Small. Prepare yourself for that. I'm looking forward to it. Also, before we go, yes, Professor, it's a very, very important point. The budget is not about goodies. The budget is the government coming to report to the nation where we are in terms of our economy and our state of affairs. And it's also used to inspire confidence to investors. That being said, I'll see you next week Tuesday and let you know whether or not I'm inspired.
Yeah, just wait for the good news, folks.
Anyway, Sean Michael Small, thank you very much. And to you and to our team and to all our viewers, reminding you today is a good day to have a good day. With all the stress, with all the anxiety, and even with all the horror that is emanating amongst us, hopefully we can be the positivity that TNT needs and what we want to see.
Folks, remember your allegiance to the Republic. Budget Talk will continue tomorrow on Talking Point, and we will see you then. Bye-bye.
WESN